I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 127 of the podcast today. So today, we're just going to talk about a recent event that took place in the community, the Women Entrepreneurs Panel, Women in Leadership Building Your Strengths. So the WE Forums are a brand new initiative started in the community, mainly by Christine Beech, the Executive Director of the Kabara Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, and Heather Holmes with RAEDI, Rochester Area Economic Development. These started in January and have continued pretty much at least once a quarter in the form of a panel or a workshop just to get women together, get women entrepreneurs, get women small business owners in one room to talk about issues facing women specifically in business and to work towards solutions. So this has been really a great event that they've been launching in the community and has been really successful in bringing women together. So just last week on April 18th, they held their panel, Women in Leadership Building on Your Strengths. And this featured 5 key women in the community. And I'm just going to read their bios right from the little pamphlet that they gave out at the event. Best way to go, right? So the panel featured first Melissa Brinkman. She's the CEO of Custom Alarm Custom Communications. So Melissa began her career at Custom Alarm in 1998, where she started in sales and marketing, and worked her way up before being named CEO in February 2014. Melissa takes pride in volunteering and engaging in organizations throughout the region, including the Minnesota Children's Museum of Rochester, United Way, RAEDI, Journey to Growth, Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Lourdes Foundation. She's been a driving force in the growth of the Children's Museum with her involvement with that organization over the last 12 years. Through her volunteering, she's made many connections and believes that those connections have led to friendships, business, and to overall success in life. Also on the panel was Lisa Clarke, the Executive Director of DMC Economic Development Agency. Lisa leads the DMC initiative, the largest public-private economic development partnership in the history of the state of Minnesota. She spent 20 years with Mayo Clinic in progressive roles, with the past 7 focused on providing leadership and strategic direction to realize the DMC vision. During that time, she organized research and defined the initiative's needs, galvanized the legislation, and built relationships throughout the community, region, and state. Lisa serves on many community and regional boards, including Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, the Greater Rochester Arts and Cultural Trust, the Rochester Area Foundation, and the Rochester Airport Company. She has an MBA from St. Thomas and a BS from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Also on the panel was Kathleen Harrington, president of the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce. Kathleen's career spans from workforce development to government relations and communication. She retired as chairwoman of Mayo Clinic's Public Policy and Government Relations Division before her chamber position. Kathleen spent 30 years in Washington, D.C., working on health policy and workforce issues. She served as chief of staff for Congresswoman Nancy L. Johnson, vice president of federal government relationships at Atina, assistant administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, and had 2 tours of duty of the Department of Labor as assistant secretary for both congressional relations and external relations. Her last assignment in Washington was as director of Office of External Affairs for the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services, during which she developed and implemented the education and enrollment campaign for Medicare Part D. Also on the panel was Kim Norton, mayor of Rochester. Kim became the first woman mayor of Rochester and took office in January 2019. Most recently, Kim won a Bush Fellowship, which allowed her to complete a master's degree at the U of M Humphrey School of Public Affairs, focused on leadership and energy policy. This work allowed her to investigate communities noted for their sustainability and livability. Prior to her fellowship, she served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, representing District 25B. During her 10 years as legislator, she introduced many pieces of legislation, including the DMC initiative. She was a member of the Rochester Public School Board for 8 years, including chair for 1 year. She serves on many local and state nonprofit boards, including ARC, Fresh Energy, KSMQ, Minnesota Children's Museum of Rochester, and Healthy Communities Collaborative. Kim is also a member of the Greater Rochester Rotary Club. And last but not least, if that wasn't enough, the last member on the panel was Cindy Steinhauser, Director of Community Development with the City of Rochester. Prior to her newly created position in Rochester that began in December 2018, Cindy was the first female city manager for the city of Frankfort, Kentucky. Originally from Dubuque, Iowa, she spent time working on downtown development for the cities of Dubuque and Clinton, and is a graduate of Loras College with a degree in finance and economics. She's also received certifications in local government management through the International City Managers Association and the Economic of Downtown Redevelopment, and in community-initiated development from the National Main Street Center. Throughout her career, she has worked on many activities involving community planning and visioning. She's also been involved with leadership training, urban renewal, and urban revitalization projects, transportation enhancement and planning projects, neighborhood planning, and historic preservation projects. So obviously a very great panel, a very impactful panel. And I have to say this was an extremely informative event to be at. It's not very often where you get this many women in such high and powerful positions together. So as an audience member, this was a really fantastic event. I was actually listening through it before I came onto this podcast today just to check over my notes, and I had forgotten some of the really amazing points and very powerful points these women had made. So you're in for a real treat in the podcast today as we talk through some of the topics that were discussed. If you missed out on the panel, certainly listen to the podcast, but if you want to hear it firsthand from the speakers themselves, the event was actually live streamed on Facebook. So if you go, there is a Facebook page called We Forum #RochMN. That's We Forum #RochMN. You can find the live stream of the event there. But again, this was a women in leadership panel focused on discussing topics very specific to women that women face in getting into leadership roles. So the panel was moderated by Heather Holmes. So one of the first questions she asked, directed towards Kathleen Harrington, the president of the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce. She asked Kathleen, how did you get on your current professional development path? And how did you know this is what you wanted to do? Kathleen said she knew early on that she always had wanted to drive change. She was always driven to take roles to help individuals or organizations be the best that they could be. And that's really the path that she followed throughout her whole career. From her bio, as you learned just a few moments ago, she spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., where she was always put into positions to create something new or to fix something. She thought of herself as a professional camp counselor, and she said this, referring to herself in the role that she was in, where she had a lot of power and a lot of responsibility as a professional camp counselor, was really a typical form of female self-deprecation in referring to herself in that role. But she knew this was something she always wanted to do from very early on in her career to help individuals and organizations be the best that they could be. Her career, as was noted in her bio, has taken lots of turns, and the choices she made along the way on that winding path were each taken to learn more along her career path. So that term self-deprecation came up in Kathleen's first response. So one of the next questions, which was directed to Cindy Steinhauser, again, the Director of Community Development with the City of Rochester, was the comment that women tend to self-deprecate a lot more than men. And Cindy was asked, do you get challenged with this inner voice, with this self-doubt creeping in? And then what do you do to quiet it? And Cindy said the first thing is to recognize that that voice is there, and you don't need to blame yourself for it being there. She says micro-messaging is pervasive all around us, and you have to be active in identifying the micro-messaging and to not let it frame or influence how you think about yourself and believe in yourself, basically. She said she had great male and female leadership to learn from along her career path. She said one of the most important things is to know who you are and what your strengths are and be authentic about using your true strengths. So really great advice. The next question was about tokenism, which is the idea that only one woman can make it to ranks of senior leadership or senior power. and that women are plagued with this idea that they're inherently competing with each other because of this tokenism, because of the idea that only one woman can be in a senior leadership position. So Kim Norton was asked that question, and she was asked, have you seen it? How do we prevent it? And how do women in positions of power deal with tokenism? And Kim said, again, she is the new mayor of Rochester. She said, in the end, we as women need to bring each other up and not tear each other down. Women have a history or reputation of being the tough ones and not supporting other women. But she said, we, everybody in that room, everybody listening to the podcast, have the power to change that. And we have to raise other women up and see our assets and not faults. And we really, in turn, just need to help each other and bring each other up and not tear each other down, which I think is fantastic advice. And we all slip into that sometimes. Melissa Brinkman was asked the next question. Again, she's the CEO of Custom Alarm Custom Communications. So her question was, she obviously is in a very male-dominated industry. And the question was, what have been the biggest challenges and opportunities she's faced in that role? And Melissa said one of the biggest challenges is that it's obviously a very technical-based industry. So to combat this, she sees the best way is to really try and learn enough about the field to be recognized as a leader and to be able to hold a conversation about the field. She said she has the opportunity every year to take 8 hours of CEU education on electrical code and low voltage training, which she participates in. She says that at these events or at these trainings and in her industry, she's often the only woman in the room. So because she's the only woman in the room, she feels the need to really be engaged and to be really intensive, and that's really worked for her. She feels that really in a male-dominated industry, she feels that women have to work twice as hard to not get dismissed and to be viewed as earning what they're receiving. She said for her this was especially important because her father actually owned the Custom Alarms company. And she worked in that company for 20 years, worked progressively through multiple different positions before being named CEO about 5 years ago. And she said she had to work really hard to make others realize she deserved the roles she was getting. She said it's really important to ask questions, and she understood that it was really important to learn that she doesn't need to know everything. She doesn't need to know everything about everything, and to not be afraid to ask questions. She said it's really important to ask herself what she needs to do to continue to grow as a leader in her field. So the next question was for Lisa Clarke, again, the executive director of the DMC Economic Development Agency. And Lisa was asked about her mentorship roles coming up in her career and how those changed as she went into greater and greater leadership roles. And she was asked, have you had male and female mentors? And Lisa said she had many mentors throughout her career. She said she had a really great female mentor right out of college who was very strong. And she said they're actually still friends. She said she learned a lot from this first female mentor about leadership, networking, and learning how to not take things personal. She said she's had both male and female mentors, and both have been equally as wonderful. She said in her current role with DMC, it's obviously a very male-centered environment. She said, it's very important to stand up for yourself and understand that sometimes you actually do know more than a mentor, but they're still very valuable. And she said to surround yourself with mentors and remember that they can be of any age, and mentors can learn from you as well. This next question was put out to the whole panel, and it was talking about bad bosses. So the whole panel was asked, is there a defining moment in your leadership and your career development that was an example of good leadership from a boss and bad leadership from a boss, and how was that really defining in your career? So Melissa said she actually had an experience with a very negative tyrant boss, as she called it, in the hotel industry. And this person in particular offered very little guidance to herself and her staff. She said he was very difficult to work for, and the staff felt very disenfranchised. This particular person didn't really seem to support or recognize the staff for their efforts. When there was a lot of extra work to be done, this person would just leave and not support the staff or offer help when it was required under certain circumstances, especially in the hotel industry. And she really saw the negative impact of being all about yourself and not being about the team. And she said in this instance, it was very difficult for her to motivate her own team. And from that experience, she really learned the need to cheer people on and to encourage them. Lisa Clarke said she was born with a lot of energy and optimism, but she quickly learned throughout her career that, unfortunately, positive energy was sometimes equated with not being as smart or not being as savvy or not being as good with numbers, which she thought was actually ridiculous. And she actually had a mentor once who was a man who told her that, yes, what we do is serious, but you don't always have to be serious. And he encouraged her to not lose that optimism and to not lose who she was. And she said that was some of the best advice she's ever been given. That nobody should be pushed down for being happy. And she joked, are you supposed to walk around with a snarl on your face and look smart? So that was pretty funny. Kathleen Harrington joked that sometimes when you get older, you kind of forget a lot of the negative things and just focus on the positives. And she said there were a lot of lessons she learned from wise men who really helped her in her career. And she said one of the first lessons is don't tell people how the watch was made, just tell them the time. So you don't have to bore people down with all the details, just tell them the main facts. She said the second lesson was you need to learn the difference between managing projects and managing process. She said don't lose sight of the big picture. And the third major lesson was for managing big projects and for messaging of big projects, make sure you have strategy, tactic, and objective and know the difference between the three of them. Kim Norton joked that as opposite to Lisa, she's always serious about everything. When she received her Bush Foundation Fellowship, she actually worked with a coach. And Kim mentioned to her coach that she was very concerned with the demeanor and attitude people were showing on social media, particularly after the most recent presidential election. And the coach said to her that she's identified the problem, and Kim had expressed several times that she didn't feel she could do anything about it. And the coach encouraged her to think about what was really holding her back. And that made Kim realize that she was actually waiting for someone to give her permission to do something. And she realized she didn't need to ask someone for permission to enact change, to challenge something that she saw. And she said, you just need to start somewhere and really start anywhere. And she had to learn that she just had to trust her gut instinct and just take the power that she had in her role and do her best to meet this need that she saw. So Kathleen Harrington had another nugget of wisdom in here in response to this question, which I thought was extremely, extremely powerful. And she said, when we're talking about bad bosses and we're talking about situations that turn very negative, it's very important to not internalize it and not ask, how can I make this person better, but ask, where can I go next? To understand that you have a lot of value. And sometimes you don't have to put up with bad behavior, and you can just remove yourself from the situation, whether that means leaving a job, or just looking out for what the next thing is going to be. And she said, never ask yourself, what can I do to better change the situation or change this person? Because it's not going to happen. You have the power to remove yourself from that situation and never look back. And one of the last questions to all the women, again, was for women in the audience or listening or watching, looking up to these women as role models, what advice do these women have for them to enter into more leadership roles? And Cindy Steinhauser was the first person that answered, and she said it's really important to not take yourself out of the running for leadership roles. As women, we automatically seem to self-select out of opportunities. She said it's really important to build your network. And she said particularly for cities, for communities, and for individuals that will succeed in the future, we have to be culturally competent, and we have to lift others up to fill jobs and workforce. And she said she thinks a solution to filling jobs, to fulfilling workforce needs that we're really facing, that will come through immigration. Kim Norton said it's really important to trust yourself. You need to talk to other people, talk to other men and women leaders. You need to have mentors. She said, apply for fellowships, put yourself out there. She said her Bush Foundation Fellowship was a phenomenal experience. She said it's very important to stretch yourself, but to start where you are, but it's important to stretch yourself. Kathleen Harrington said it's really important to embrace power. She said, power is not a pornographic thing. Power is good. Power means you can influence change. It means you can enact and influence change according to your values. So she encouraged the audience not to shy away from power, but to embrace power in a way that's authentic to you, and not to be afraid of it, and to use it to make a difference. That was just phenomenal advice. Like, I couldn't believe some of these things when I was listening back through it again. Lisa Clarke commented that a lot of the times, these things we're talking about, is a lot of it's called imposter syndrome. So the idea that women think they can't do something. But she says when someone tells her that, she says, yes, you can. Like, you've been given the role, you've been put into a job position because you can do it, and you have the power to do it, and you have the skill set to do it. So just believe in yourself. She also had 3 kind of key lessons to share. The first was for young and upcoming women. She encouraged them to find gaps in your organization and fill them. She says you don't have to stay on that ladder or that organization forever, but just fill the gaps that you see. The second lesson she wanted to impart was to mind your reputation every single day. She said your reputation is everything, and it's something you have to take care of. And this includes, she said, every interaction you make with somebody is important, and it matters. And it doesn't matter if this is on social media or on one-on-one interactions. Your reputation is something that you need to take care of. And she said, number 3, do something with purpose, and then go at it with all your inner strength you can find. And she said, if you do this, you will be fabulous. So again, great advice. Melissa answered the question of how do you gain or enter into more leadership roles by saying you need to be authentic, you need to be yourself, and you need to be curious. And she said, look at where you can affect change. And she says, if you need to challenge the status quo, make sure you ask questions in a respectful way. And she said, don't compare yourself to others, which is something that's very hard to do. And everyone is trying their best every single day. But she said, really, just get involved. A lot of the times we're waiting for somebody to ask us to get involved, but she said, just do it. You need to put yourself out there. And even if you think you're not the most qualified person, it doesn't matter. Just put yourself out there and go after it. Then we took some questions from the audience, which were really great. So one of the first questions that was asked to the panel is, what hurdles did they have to go through that the next generation doesn't? And what hurdles does this generation have yet to face? Kim Norton said that one of the main things facing today's youth is social media, which obviously wasn't around before. And she said, you're really putting your lives out there for everyone to see. She said to be very mindful, again, back to the reputation issue. Don't put something out on social media that will hurt your rise in leadership. And she said one thing that her generation had to face that today's doesn't, that is often forgotten upon, is just a lot of the ceilings that were broken down. She said, with school, when she was starting out, opportunities were just opening up for female athletics. And her generation really had to fight for these opportunities. And sometimes people don't remember that these fights were fought and these ceilings were broken down for later generations. And she said, for today's women, the world is really open and to take advantage of it. Cindy Steinhauser said again that social media is really a new thing facing today's generation. But she said it really represents an opportunity when managed well. She said with social media, today's generation has a much stronger voice and has a way to more quickly engage and more effectively mobilize around issues. But this has to be used wisely. She said this generation really has started to challenge old policies and platforms that are in place that don't leave room for women and minorities. She said there are still systems in place that keep barriers. And she said we have to work actively to change policy and to get better representation. Kathleen Harrington said in her generation, one issue they had to face was the general workforce not really embracing family. She brought up a specific issue where she was not allowed to put a photo of her daughter on her desk at work because she would be perceived as not being as dedicated to her job as her male counterpart. She said for today's generation, that's really changed. And she's seen people really standing up for this change, standing up for a place for family and more work-life balance. She said for everyone, there'll be a time in their career when there'll be a tension between ambition and parenthood. And she said it'll really hurt, but you need to prepare for this and know how you're going to face it, because it won't be solved by government. It has to be a decision that you make. She said ambition's a wonderful thing, but so is parenthood. So this issue of family came up a couple times, which I thought was really powerful, because when you get in a room with a lot of male leaders, the issue of family, motherhood, parenthood, it's not really touched upon. So this came up again in an answer from Lisa Clarke, and she said that when people ask her about work-life balance, she said you have to remember that the jobs will always be here. The career will always be here. You might just be a little bit more delayed in your path, but you need to be true to yourself. She said that she actually has the best husband ever, but it's still a challenge every day. And she said to kind of achieve work-life balance, even on the weekends, they choose to do one event for the community related to her job, and they choose to do one event on their weekend for themselves. And she said, this is something that you're in charge of. Your boss isn't in charge of it, and your business isn't in charge of it. And you need to find that sense of connectivity to your family. Kathleen Harrington said that she's always felt like a juggler during her career, and there's always been kind of multiple balls in the air related to her career and her family and her marriage. And she said a lot of the times, unfortunately, this marriage ball is one of the easiest ones to let go, or it's perceived as the easiest one to let go. But in the long run, at the end of the day, maybe that's the most important. She said careers are great, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out what's most important to you. Again, a lot of issues came up and a lot of things that don't often come up in male-focused or in male-centric panels. And there was a comment from Melissa to wrap up the panel that her parents and family have been very helpful in allowing her to pursue these leadership roles. And she said it's useful to have a network of people to ask for help. And one of the important lessons she's learned is you can't be afraid to say no. You have to set priorities and say no to things. And Cindy wrapped it up by saying to achieve work-life balance, you really have to give yourself permission to take time off. And it's actually productive to take time off and reset. And I cannot agree with that anymore. We all need to not overburden ourselves, and we need to learn to say no. We need to set boundaries, and we need to recognize what our priorities are in our lives. So again, this was a fantastic panel. Thank you to Christine with the Kabara Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies and Heather with RAEDI for putting this event on. Again, you can see the live stream on their Facebook page, WeForum #RajMN, if you want to watch the video. They're actually having a follow-up workshop event on leadership on June 27th. It's called Building Your Leadership Style Using Strengths Finders, and it'll be mediated by Bethany Von Steinbergs. So you can find that Eventbrite page is already out there. Registration's already open. And again, you can find more information on their WeForum's RajMN page. So I hope to see all the women in Rochester, all the women in business, all the women in leadership at this next event. These have been really fantastic things to mobilize a portion of our entrepreneurial and small business community and to bring women together. So again, thank you, Christine and Heather, for bringing these things forward. All right, that's a wrap for the podcast today. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you consume your podcast content so that you never miss a story of innovation and entrepreneurship coming out of Rochester, Minnesota. We'll see you here next week with a brand new episode.